Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
This is where we cover the stories that made it into the news and those that didn't but should have. It's news from elsewhere and from a different point of view. It's not often I can squeeze in a guest fresh from her encounter with the Archbishop of Canterbury and on her way to the airport for an audience in Rome with His Holiness the Pope. But it's good. She may be smelling of incense today, but it's the rather more sulphurous whiff of the close proximity of high explosives that she's used to. She's Mother Agnes Mariam of the Cross of the Diocese of Homs, Hama and Yabrud in the Syrian Arab Republic, here on what has suddenly become a controversial tour of Britain. You'd think the British anti-war movement would be interested in hearing what a representative of Syria's Christian communities has to say about the US-backed so-called rebels and their beheading ways. But alas, her scheduled appearance in today's Stop the War Coalition International Peace Conference was scuppered by liberals who don't much care to hear from a woman with an actual first-hand account. No, apparently they prefer to hear only from other armchair activists who've gained their opinion from the evening news. Mother Agnes may have been denied the right to speak at the Stop the War Coalition, but she'll reach a much bigger audience here on Sputnik. We'll be talking to her in the second half of the show. This month in 1979, hundreds of Iranian militants stormed the US Embassy in Tehran, taking hostage those inside, whom they described as a nest of spies, sparking a long Cold War between the Islamic Republic and the West, punctuated by hot war slaughter by proxy in the Iraq-Iran war and directly by the shooting down of an Iranian airliner by the US warship Vincennes. Not so long ago, by which I mean weeks, not months, it looked like war was imminent. But as Mr. Churchill said, jaw is usually preferable. And lo and behold, peace is breaking out, at least on the international level, in both Syria and Iran. The nuclear deal, sealed with retweets, hugs and kisses. Well, the Iranians don't do hugs and kisses, but you know what I mean. In Geneva this week is a triumph for diplomacy and a defeat for the dogs of war. How's it going down, Gayatri?
President Rouhani, who has an own Twitter account.
Has he?
Yes, and he's very active on it.
Extraordinary.
He this week, on the day of the deal, said that the agreement in Geneva is a very positive first step, but the journey before us is long.
Who knew a president of Iran online on Twitter?
Indeed, and so active. It's fantastic. He's got a lot of followers on it as well. This week, Reuters and Ipsos also came with a survey among Americans about how they feel about the Iran peace talks. And 44% of them support the interim peace deal between Iran and the 6 big powers. 22%, however, oppose it. Just 50%, however, says that the US should use its military power to defend Israel against
50%.
threats. 50%.
Well, that would have been 100% just a few decades ago. If you calibrate the effort that the Israel lobby makes in the United States to absolutely control the political system and the money that they spend on it, but they only have 50% of the support of the public. Now, you took the camera out onto the streets of London to see what the public thought about the fact that peace is breaking out everywhere. Yeah. How did that go?
Well, everybody's, of course, very, very positive about it. Everybody wants peace. There were some who were a bit skeptic or maybe critical about the actual peace agreement, what's in it. But overwhelmingly, they're welcoming it, of course.
Let's take a look.
I think it's good. You know, you want to have peace around the world. I mean, you don't want any threat of nuclear bomb going off really any time. So the less bombs, the better.
There's only the Israelis think they haven't. And they have a vested interest in keeping the West at odds with Iran.
America and Israel work together. You know, they are from the same womb. Yeah? So when one is doing something and the other is there, are they playing good cop, bad cop?
People who don't have a stake in in the risks involved are able to create the peace treaty, and the people who are local understand the major risk involved. I think to trust the Iranians is a terrible mistake.
I think anybody that stands up against imperialism, that stands against people that try and take your independence away, and anybody that stands up for their own independence, rock on.
My first guest, John Wight, is a novelist, a writer, and an analyst. He's also been the most stalwart defender of Mother Agnes Mariam of the Cross's right to be heard in Britain during her tour. And he's joining us now for the first time on Sputnik. John, thanks very much for coming on the show. Tell us, first of all, how did it come to pass that someone with first-hand evidence of what's happening in Syria is effectively blackballed from the Stop the War International Peace Conference?
This, unfortunately, was the doing of a couple of Liberal commentators who are also delegates at this conference who still believe, for some strange reason, that there is actually a revolution taking place in in Syria, and believe that you can have a situation where you're against Western intervention and against the present Syrian government. But who else is going to stop these barbarians unless it's the Syrian government? I don't know if these Liberal commentators have 30 divisions of armed troops up their sleeve to take to the conflict, but if they don't, then that's a non-position, and it's actually disgraceful given the position of this country vis-à-vis Libya and vis-à-vis Iraq. They've not learned from history.
Now, there seems to be a complete about-face going on the part of the big Western powers. Yeah. Just a few weeks ago, we were almost at war with Syria, and thus, by extension, Iran. Now, we're headed for Geneva 2, in Geneva on the Syrian track, and we've done a deal on the nuclear question with Iran. How did we get to this stage?
Well, this is due to two things. It's due to the resistance of the Syrian people and the Syrian Arab army standing by their government against what is an invasion. It's not a revolution, it's an invasion of their case of foreign jihadists, extremists, religious obscurantists and barbarians. And it's also British public opinion. If you recall, you were part of that, I know, the momentous vote taken in the Parliament, where the British public opinion drove our politicians for once to find a spine, to find the guts, to stay the hand of the British government. And that was a very seminal moment in our history. And comparisons have been drawn quite rightly, I think, with the momentous Norway debate that turned the course of the Second World War.
This is 1940, where yes. Chamberlain fell and was replaced by Mr. Churchill.
Absolutely. After the invasion of Norway and Britain's debacle.
We might have been conducting this conversation in German if that debate had not happened.
But for the people of the Middle East, this is equally as momentous, because they are facing a turning point in their history. Is this country, is Syria, going to be turned into a graveyard for minorities, Muslim and non-Muslim, or is it going to remain a multi-language, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, secular, modern state, which the overriding identity that joins Syrians together is Arab, not religion, not sectarianism. So these are the stakes involved. And this is why when the Western powers are entering into Geneva 2 in January, they're doing so from a position of weakness. Their first option was to topple Assad through their proxies among the so-called opposition. The second option was to enter peace talks, but Assad would have to go. He would have to resign. Why should he resign? The Syrian army have bled for this man for 2.5 years. The Syrian people have suffered and stood by their government for 2.5 years. So it's a question of national sovereignty, it's a question of dignity, and so it's encouraging that the Western powers are entering these talks. However, we have to be careful.
It's encouraging, but it's very surprising.
Yes, it's very surprising.
I myself, as a practitioner in the field, I'm not entirely sure why they have apparently taken this big step back. I won't call it a capitulation, because they're still causing real trouble in Syria, and they're still capable of causing real trouble for Iran. But it's a very big step backwards for them. Does it reflect the weakness of the political class on both sides of the Atlantic?
It does, yes, especially the Obama administration. The Western powers understand the character of the opposition. They know that they can no longer be seen to even hint at any support of these 7th century barbarians. The same ideology responsible for 9/11, the 7/7 bomb in London, the Madrid bomb, the murder of Lee Rigby, most recently in London, we were going to join forces with that ideology, in effect. And so people could see that. And there is an old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And these people will not be fooled again.
Will it be sabotaged? It has two major opponents in the region, Israel and Saudi Arabia, the medieval despotism linked up with the so-called only democracy in the Middle East. This is an unholy alliance, to be sure. but it's an alliance with a lot of powerful friends,
Yes.
and in the Saudi case, a lot of money.
Yes.
Are they capable of sabotaging the peace track?
They're certainly capable of trying their damnedest to do so, and they are trying, but they're becoming increasingly isolated, not just regionally, but in the whole world. We've got Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been like Dr. Strangelove on steroids over the past week. The way that he's tried to, this is a historic mistake and so on, all this apocalyptic language. And Rouhani's been the exemplar of rational and diplomacy and, phlegmatism.
But you encountered a lot of English people in London saying to hang with Israel's objections. Yeah. Why don't we start acting in the interests of ourselves and everybody else in future?
And the people suffering, of course, the actual sanctions. People are tired. People are seeing the real face of Israel,
Yes.
But the one thing that the people were very critical about is they're wondering why why the U.S. is now making such a deal. What's behind it? Why it seems like they're betraying their friend Israel and Saudi Arabia, for that matter.
Well, I think the US requires stability in the region, and its first option was to foment regional hegemony. This was part of a long process after 9/11. That's failed. That's crashed on the rocks of Syria. And Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, rightly described Iran, Syria and Hezbollah as constituting an axis of resistance. So Israel's interests are regionally in order to weaken and neuter Iran for its own regional hegemonic purposes. But what we have to understand is Iran has never occupied another country in the region, it's never initiated military conflict, and it doesn't have nuclear weapons. Well, Israel's guilty of all three. So what is the cause of instability in the region? It doesn't take a genius to work it out. And so I think American public opinion has significantly shifted with regard to Israel, especially amongst the young.
She read a statistic earlier which was amazing. 50% just. Not even a majority, exactly half of Americans think that America should continue to guarantee the security of Israel.
Oh, this is huge.
But the dog that isn't barking there is the other 50%.
Yes.
And once upon a time, in recent memory, almost all Americans would have pledged their troth to the defense of Israel's security. So the world's falling out of love with Israel and never has been in love with Saudi Arabia. So they've got an uphill battle if they want to persuade people to scupper this deal. John Wight, thanks very much for joining us on Sputnik. Stay with us. We'll be right back with an interview with the aforementioned Mother Superior. Welcome back to Sputnik. In January, some of the warring parties in Syria will sit down around a negotiating table in Geneva. After the success of the Iran deal, can we look forward to peace and reconciliation in Syria? You were out in the streets of London, Gayatri. Was there optimism abroad about that prospect?
Well, where there is a way out diplomatically, people will always prefer that rather than the military way.
Joe, rather than war, as Mr. Churchill famously said. But the skepticism of the British media remains high. They have developed a kind of ogre, demonic figure in the current government of Syria. It's difficult for them to climb down.
Well, the people believe differently, so let's have a look.
As you well know, the main media, has been just feeding things out there for people, to take, without thinking about it, And that's what we're being fed, but there's a lot more going on there than we realize.
That's far too sectarian now. There's Al-Qaeda, there's everybody in there pretending to be opponents of the government.
I think what Obama has done basically is retreated from the world. I think he's basically abdicated any leadership position, and I don't want to insult any Brits by saying this, but I think that he's Neville Chamberlain #2.
My next guest is Mother Agnes Mariam of the Cross of the Diocese of Homs, Hama and Yabrud. A very, very honoured guest. Mother Agnes, thank you for joining us on both of our parts. We're honoured to have you here. Now, you are one of the leading voices standing up for unity and reconciliation and peace in Syria. You are one of the great defenders of the once cherished Christian community in Syria, where it was the safest place to be a Christian in the whole Arab world and is now practically hell on earth. Tell us, please, from your standpoint as someone who's been living through all of this, exactly what the situation is for Christians in Syria.
Well, all the fears in the beginning are becoming incarnated in the reality. We have now a succession of invasion, real invasion on Christian stronghold, historical also stronghold like Ma'lula, Sadad, Kara, Der Atiye, Nebek, and yesterday I heard about Saidnaya. Is it a religious war? I don't think. Is it a Christian persecution? I don't think. I think that those who are engineering the events in Syria wants to give a justification for the systematic destruction of the Syrian state and the dismantling of the Syrian social tissue because they have very wide objectives. And the Christians, the religious component, what is more precisely religious extremism is a tool, a war tool.
Indeed, but the fanatics are not just targeting Christians.
No.
They're targeting other Muslim sects and also those in their own sect who don't agree with their medieval, obscurantist, savage interpretation of Islam.
Exactly.
And so almost everyone is an enemy except those who agree with their very narrow interpretation.
Yes, it's an exclusivist, extremist, fanatic facade of an ongoing violence to destroy the Syrian state.
Indeed, and though Christians have always had this honored special place in Syrian society, now what do you think your Muslim neighbors imagine when they see statues of the Virgin being willfully smashed, churches being sacked, the black flag of Al-Qaeda being placed in the place of the cross? Do you feel a sense of solidarity from the Muslim neighbors?
Of course, our coexistence, our conviviality with Islam is historical. The Arabic Christian opened their doors to the new Islamic fighters coming from Arabia. They opened their door because there was no difference on a cultural basis. And they took their distance from the Byzantine Empire then. So we were living together with the same culture, with the same values. And if you put out the politics, there is no problem between all the component of the very precious and diverse social tissue in Syria and in the Levant. Now, what is targeted is not only Christian, it's the civilization. And like this, you have mosques that are destroyed, you have Druze shrines that are destroyed, you have Sufi shrines, and you have synagogues that are destroyed. Among them, the oldest one in the world, the Jobar synagogue, that goes until the Solomonian time. So it is a threat against civilization, and we are back to the barbarian era.
It has failed, though, hasn't it? Just a few weeks ago, in Parliament, which is my other job,
yes,
was part of the decisive majority which stopped Britain actually attacking Syria in conjunction with the United States, and by so doing, stopped the United States from attacking. And now, as you saw on the vox pops on the screen, we're talking about talks now in January. This is a transformation, almost
yes,
a miracle, of
yes,
the situation that existed only a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago at most. This sense of failure, is it likely to make these fanatics more barbaric, or will they begin now to withdraw from the country? Will they begin to seek some kind of accommodation with the government in Damascus?
I think first that I have to thank the British House of Commons for its historical and prophetic vote that has made a turning point in the history toward peace. And it is expressing the position of the British public opinion. Second, because of this vote, as you said, it was the Congress who also adopted the same policy, and we have a big door open toward a peaceful and a non-violent settlement of the Syrian crisis. Today, what we see in Syria is completely the contrary reaction. They want to make points, to register points, and so there is a terrible recrudescence of violence everywhere. You have heard about blind shelling on civilian populations, on children, on bus schools, on professors in Damascus, in Homs. Every day we have news about slaughtering people. This blind violence seeks to register point for negotiation, but they are really showing the real face of the ongoing violence. And I really make here an appeal to all those who stand behind those foreign fighters. Please, for the sake of humanity, stop the fueling of such means. You will not gain anything. You will, at the end, the history will judge you.
The response on the street was pretty overwhelming that we don't want war, Gayatri.
No, they don't. They're very tired of it. They, in the back of their mind, they still have the Iraq and Afghani war.
Yes.
So they're quite pronounced about the Syrian war. They don't want it. They don't want.
Well, the last person, I think, from United States had another opinion. I am happy that it's not the majority. They seek war for power, and it seems that war will give to United States its predominant role. I think exactly the contrary. It's sponsoring and being the mentor of peace talks that bring President Obama to a proeminent role in the international scene.
Just briefly, we only have a few seconds left. Are you optimistic about the negotiations in January?
I will be optimistic if the people who will be there will be representative of the Syrian opposition. What I see is that the Syrian opposition today, you know, that is fragmented, so it's not representative. Moreover, those who are presented as the sole representative of the Syrian people do not have any grassrooted representation. They are out of Syria since 30 years. We want the internal opposition that is non-violent and that is representative of the majority of the opposition in Syria to be represented.
Mother Agnes, we must all pray for that outcome.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed
Bless you.
for joining us on Sputnik. Now this is the part of the show where we listen to the world, you, through our Twitter portal. Gayatri, how's Sputnik going down in the Twitter sphere?
Well, unlike the positivity that I received on the streets about the peace talks, the people on Twitter were a bit more skeptical about, especially the Iran deal. Lana Del Rey was a grossly unfair deal, but the only way they could ease sanctions. Iran shouldn't have to plead to the US for basic rights.
I don't think Iran has been pleading for basic rights. I think Iran has protected and defended its inalienable right to have a nuclear energy program. It's expressed in a sweeter way through President Rouhani, who we now know has a Twitter account, but I don't think that Iran has sacrificed its essential rights.
Well, I think I agree with you, because on the streets I was speaking to a number of Iranians, and they all hold on to their dignity. They all said, yeah, we have suffered under sanctions, but we still prosper, yeah, in our own way, and we didn't go on our knees to get the deal.
Iran hasn't surrendered. It's the Western powers that have surrendered. After all, regime change in Iran was their actual goal, nothing to do with nuclear energy.
About Syria, Tony Hughes says that the war in Syria will end when the Takfiris come and paymasters realize it's over for them. They'll move out, and I'm concerned about legitimate protest after.
Yeah, and of course some of them will come back to countries like ours and yours in the Netherlands and wreak havoc there if they can. It's what happens when Dr. Frankenstein built a monster. He didn't realize that it's called a monster for a reason. It's soon out of control. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. I hope you enjoyed Sputnik as much as we enjoyed making it.
Please do keep supplying us with your tweets and your thoughts at RT_Sputnik. That's it from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.